Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tiff Talks Tech. Today, I am excited because I am joined by AJ Tibbitts, who's the manager of pricing and market analysis at WinnCompanies. And today, we're going to be talking about automating leasing for military families and all about flexibility and compliance. But before we start, AJ, can you share a little bit about yourself and kind of your experience?
Sure. So I know most people's stories in the industry start with a random job posting they found or something like
Yeah.
that. But I actually was raised by this industry a little bit. So my parents were a property manager and facility manager team. And so growing up, I learned how leases worked and how calming an apartment worked and curb appeal and all of that at a very young age.
That's really
Um,
cool.
I did kind of fall into it later as an adult, just because it was something that was familiar. In 2018, I was living in military housing on Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, and I was looking for a job because we'd just moved. And I thought, what if I just work here? And I applied, and a few weeks later, I started what I thought would just be a temporary job until I graduated and I moved into my field, and then ended up turning out to be a 6 year and counting career with Win.
Yeah, that's awesome, though. I love that. And I love hearing about everybody says you just fall into multifamily, but I love hearing about how that happened. And that's really cool that your parents had that background too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely very interesting raising.
Yeah.
I was painting houses when I was very, very young
Oh my
and
gosh.
helping get leases signed, taking them out to residents when my mom was busy. And yeah, so it's been a very, very long road for me.
That's really cool though. That seems like just like a natural transition in there. So I want to start by kind of diving into the challenges that military families face in leasing, because they are often having to relocate and deal with deployments. So, what are some of the biggest challenges that they have when it comes to actually leasing?
Generally, the biggest challenges that they're going to run into are communication
Mm,
and communication. It's all going to fall under the communication umbrella. So
yeah,
whether that's the time zone that they're in, because they're often still at their last duty station as they're trying to rent a new home wherever they're PCSing to, or which PCS is permanent change of station for those that don't know. That is when military gets their orders and then they move with it. That's a PCS move.
yeah,
So really everything comes down to making sure that we make the process for them as easy as possible when they're already handling so many other things. They have to deal with
yeah,
transportation, leaving family behind, making a new group connection, community in their new location. So anything that we as housing providers can do to make their lives easier, in my opinion, that's what we should do. And that's what automating leasing is really about, trying to make that process easier for them.
yeah, definitely. So, like, I know so I lived near a military base, and I know a lot of times, they had to be married to live off of the barracks. Is that always the case, or, like, how does that work?
So, in order to live outside of the barracks, they have to either be married or they have to get an exception, which they would go to their military housing office to do, and they get a certificate of non-availability, meaning there isn't room in the barracks for them, or the barracks is under construction, and so they're going to have to move out, whatever the situation may be on the installation that they're assigned to at the time. And that's how they start the BAH, which is Basic Allowance for Housing, that
Mm,
helps to pay for their home off post.
yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad I was on the right track with that. So when military families are given short notice to move, how can automating things make that whole process quicker and easier for them?
So for short notice moves, time is of the essence.
Yeah.
If they get their orders and they're moving in a month, they don't have time for a leasing agent to reach out to them and then be on vacation for a week and nobody knows that that leasing agent didn't respond to this family.
Yeah.
So one of the essential things for that is making sure a solid CRM system is in place so that even if it's assigned to one leasing agent, it's in the system and all of that communication is tracked so that somebody else can seamlessly pick it up and there's no dropped balls. Because, like
Yeah.
I said, communication is always going to be the biggest challenge for them.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's so important that the on-site staff knows how it works too, because you don't want them writing things on sticky notes and then forgetting about it. Like, they need to enter things in the system.
Absolutely. And that's not even to mention compliance, making sure that it's all in one place. So if we do unfortunately have turnover and somebody leaves, and then we get a fair housing complaint or we get a discrimination complaint of some other kinds, that's all tracked and logged. We know what time that person called to ask about something, or we know exactly what happened in that conversation because a lot of CRM software also has phone call recording so that you can go
Yeah.
back and review it.
Yeah, that's helpful to give the full picture of what is going on with that prospect. For sure. So often military families, they need to have flexibility in those lease agreements, especially if they're getting reassigned or deployed. So how can automated systems really accommodate that, especially with those early lease terminations or those mid lease changes that can happen and sometimes can cause a hassle?
Sure. So the biggest piece for automation in that will be the digital leasing.
Hmm.
So if you are able to assemble that lease in a timely manner, send it out to them when they're first getting there, make sure they have a digital copy so that they don't have to reach out and wait for somebody to get back to them to get a copy of their lease. They don't have to ask you what the process is. They can look at their lease and they know what exactly the requirements are to get out of it. Which under the SCRA, which is the Service Member Civil Relief Act, they have certain allowances for if they get PCS orders, they can't be held to the full 12-month lease as long as they give notice as soon as they get their orders. And as long as they give either the required notice or as much of that notice as possible until their report date, they have to be allowed to move. And so that's kind of where that flexibility piece comes in and really ensuring that site staff is up to date and aware of what the most recent changes to SCRA are is the biggest piece of that. I am always an advocate for education, which is a little off topic from automation, but education, education, education. And with
Yeah.
education, we simplify processes and it allows us to automate because everyone knows what they're doing and they can just follow the SOP, follow the automated process. Half of it's taken care of for them through automation. And we don't have any compliance issues. We don't have any residents thinking they're stuck in their lease or having to pay a lease break fee when they shouldn't.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any kind of nuances that you see with an online lease when it comes to military housing that you might not have with a regular property?
So a lot of our nuances come from the NDAA. Military housing does have to comply with the most recent updates to the NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act. As of 2019, I believe, there were new updates for the way that we as military housing providers are required to administer our leases and manage our relationships with our residents and so on. So we do have a standard lease that we are required to use, that all military housing providers are required to use, that includes a lot of different allowances that off post may not necessarily be required.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Um, when they have the opportunity to renew, especially if they are deployed. How can the systems that we use really make sure that the process is handled smoothly and without any bumps in the road?
With that, I'm going to go back to CRM
Yeah,
because if they're deployed, more than likely they're in a crazy time zone on the
yeah,
other side of the world. And so when they're emailing us or they're calling us, that's going to end up logged in a system. There's not going to be a person there to answer the phone probably. And
yeah. And
so
if they're
having
deployed, that's like precious time because they can't always get to the phone.
absolutely their time on the computers and on their phones is very limited, especially if they aren't fortunate enough to have a cell plan that covers over there. A lot
Yeah,
of times they end up just with Wi-Fi and they have to make do with that. So making sure that there are systems in place that allow them, allow to accommodate for that is incredibly important.
yeah. Absolutely. So for those families and people that are stationed overseas or in remote locations, how does automating things for document signings and rent payments really keep everything running smoothly for them?
With that, there's no way that they could come into the office. So
Yeah,
if there is not an automated process, there isn't a way for them to go online and take care of it themselves. They have to come in, they're going to end up delinquent or they're going to end up evicted. And then nobody wants that. Nobody
yeah,
wants to have to go through that. And nobody wants to have to do that to a resident. That's never our goal. So
yeah,
making sure that those processes are in place to set them up for success it is huge. And something that we have started using the last few years is a resident app so that they can go in and pay their rent and take care of anything that they need to. They can submit work orders through there so they don't have to call a person in the office. So if they're deployed and just their kids are home with their grandmother and that's just babysitting them, for example, they can submit a work order from Syria or Korea or wherever they're TDY or deployed to
yeah.
without having to worry about calling into the office or who's allowed to submit a work order and who's allowed to be on the lease or not on the lease and all of that.
Yeah, and I think that that is so important, especially like there are so many conventional communities that might have an influx in military people who live there. Like I was saying, like I grew up near one of the biggest military bases, Camp Pendleton, and we had a lot of military who lived in the apartment communities right outside the base and things like that. So, and they weren't official military housing. But it was so important that they kept all of this in mind because that was a situation for a lot of residents.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to that, especially being an off-post community that often caters to military, the biggest thing to keep in mind is that you're going to be flooded during PCS season.
Mhm,
That's from May to August of every year. During that time, a large portion of the military community is moving nearly simultaneously, and it's
mm,
extremely busy. It's our busiest time of year. And for anyone that is set up near the installation, it's probably also their busiest time of year, I would imagine, because as residents are moving out in mass to move wherever they need to, and then new residents are moving in mass to get to that new duty station, the turnover and keeping up with assigning people and getting back to them in a timely manner so that each prospect is getting the attention that they deserve and the customer service that we want to achieve, it's extremely important. And using CRM software and apps so that they can do online applications and online payments and anything else to try and take the bulk of that load off of our leasing agents and off of our resident services coordinators or whatever that role is called at your community so that they can focus on the real core of their job, which is taking care of our future residents and our current residents and making
Yeah.
sure that they get the service they deserve.
Yeah, and it's so important to make sure that your staff is prepared during those busy seasons and that they know the processes that need to happen because if you're in the middle of training somebody in that crazy time, it's just going to be a hot mess.
Absolutely. Ensuring that SOPs are up to date and there's standard processes that everyone knows exactly how that works rather than everyone does it just kind of a little bit differently. That's another piece of automation that I think gets overlooked a lot, ensuring that everyone is on the same page and we don't have people out just doing their best making up
Yeah.
what they need to do, which is never their fault if there isn't an SOP in place. There are plenty of times where they come up with great ideas of how to do things, but if it's not a standardized way, it's not going to help anybody. It's going to take the extra time so that the next person that picks up that task is going to know what happened. They're not going to
Yeah.
know what the last person did. Versus if there's an SOP and they know that that last person did it XYZ way, then they know the next steps in the process are this, this, and this.
Yeah, exactly. So I do want to talk a little bit about compliance and some of those legal considerations. There's a lot of factors when it comes to compliance, like you mentioned, especially with the Service Members Civil Relief Act, the SCRA, that properties need to keep in mind when leasing to military families. How can automation really help make sure that we are hitting all those legal requirements and that they're consistently met?
Sure. Well, just like with fair housing and ADA compliance and making sure that we are not on the wrong side of the law, the
Yeah,
biggest piece is going to be consistency. So ensuring that you have processes like SOPs, like we were just talking about, that everyone knows exactly how that works. They know where the information is logged, like in our CRM system, or if you're doing welcome cards in the leasing office, whatever your situation may be, making sure that all of that is in place. So if a service member says, I came in and gave notice on this day, and that matches when their orders were, but you have a card through the leasing office that says they actually came in a few days later, and that's why they're getting a charge because they didn't come in within the time frame that they needed to have the lease break fee waived. You have that documented. It's not something that becomes a he said, she said situation where they can claim discrimination and it becomes a whole compliance issue.
yeah. Exactly. Having that documentation can really make a world of difference for sure. How can automation help property managers really keep track of those leasing requirements, like when it comes to terminations or special military clauses that might come into play? I know that's one example, but are there, any others?
Yeah, so one of the biggest pieces that's different when administering to military families versus civilian families would be them being able to break their lease with orders.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. And making sure that you're up to date on SCRA so that when they bring their orders in, you know what you're looking at is extremely important. And being able to document that in a way that's consistent. So knowing that in your software, whether that's Yardi or Entrada or whatever system you use, it's in the same place consistently. And if you need to go back and see why this person that moved out in 14 days and didn't give the 30-day notice they were required to, didn't have to pay a lease break fee, they can go into the system and grab the orders and see, okay, that makes sense. They got short orders and we weren't able to charge them. They needed to go on their way. That was what the military asked of them.
Yeah. Totally. So I do want to talk about the payment piece a little bit too, because a lot of families they rely on the basic allowance for housing, like we were saying earlier, the BAH, to manage those rent payments. So how does it work with automating rent collection and the payment processing, and how do we stay on guideline when that is an automated thing.
Sure. So with that piece, a lot of it is actually done by the military service
Oh,
if
perfect.
you work directly with them. So as a military provider, we are able to be set up through DFAS that the military's pay comes directly to us as an allotment. And that can actually be done for any housing provider. You just have to work with the local housing office on that installation to have them set you up as a official provider. A lot of different installations have lists that they'll provide to the military that they've looked at the lease at that place and they know that it's a solid lease. You're not going to end up in a situation where you're not protected and having to get legal involved or something to get out of it. So the
With
biggest resource
those
for that will be going there. Sure.
with those lists, they're not tied to only renting with those lists, but those are like they know that it's safe.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's not necessarily a list of these are the only places that you can rent. A lot of installations just when property management companies or IROs, individual rental owners, come to them and say, hey, I want to help. I want to cater to military residents. I'll accept their BAH. I'll accept a lower deposit or whatever that situation that will help that military family get into the home because during PCS, things are very tight.
Yeah.
They get added onto the list. And when the military family is in processing, which is the process of getting signed into everything so that they're part of that installation instead of the last installation, they talk to housing and they get recommendations of you can talk to the on post housing provider, which is us, or there are a handful of other providers, or you can go off post. And these ones we've had successes with before. We've never had a situation where, a service member ran into a bind where they had to end up trying to fight their way out of it.
Yeah.
And it just gives the service member a bit more peace of mind that these are safe places to live versus they can go out and they can look at anything. But if you're not catering to them and knowing what they need, the needs of military are very special. It's a very niche field, it's a very
Yeah.
niche industry within multifamily. And so it's a whole thing all by itself.
Yeah, which I think is what makes it such an interesting topic to talk about because it is so niche and there's probably not a lot of resources out there on it.
Yeah, a lot of times it ends up falling to the local apartment association and they work with whoever the military provider is
Yeah.
if they are part of the association. At my last installation that I worked on site at Cavalry Family Housing, I had the honor of being part of the association there and on the board of directors to try and make sure that they knew what was going on. I
Yeah.
was also education chair and I made sure we had an SCRA class every year to keep everyone up to date and doing what they needed to do to make sure our families were taken care of.
Yeah. That's amazing. You were saying earlier, that communication is so important when it comes to, military housing and the whole process, but it can be more crucial when obviously they're not able to be there in person. So how can our systems really help us maintain that transparency and keep those families informed? I know you said resident apps is a good way. Are there any other ways that we can boost that communication?
Yeah, so one of the best ways is making sure that you have virtual tours. I
Mhm.
cannot express that enough. Having a virtual tour so that the resident can walk through the house from wherever they are and have that warm and fuzzy feeling of stability that, okay, I have a house on the other side. I at least am not going to be struggling sitting in a hotel waiting to find housing. It's huge for them. It's a huge relief. I can say that from experience.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's even more helpful when they can see that exact unit via virtual tour as well. I know that the floor plan can be really helpful, but to see that unit in a virtual tour, I'm sure that's a world of difference.
Absolutely. And even if whatever housing provider isn't at the point where they have every single individual home documented, if there's just a lot of them and it's not to that point, even just having the floor plan in a way where they can walk through it and they can get an idea of, okay, my couch should fit here.
Yeah.
My bed will fit in this room. The kids' bunk bed will fit in this room, whatever whatever the
Yeah.
situation is. And knowing this is what my plan is. And extra bonus points if you can give them an address so they can get their kids enrolled in school and
Mhm.
they can get their mail forwarded, they can get their household goods sent directly there rather than put into storage first. There's a lot of different components that go into a PCS move, and you would be amazed at the amount of stress that we can take off of them just by being able to say, here's the home that we have waiting for you. This is the address, even if it's only 30 days out, because you may get someone inquiring 6 months out because they just got orders and they want to make sure that they have somewhere to live in 6 months. But as they get closer to that time period, 30 to 45 days, if you can tell them, this is the situation, this is the home that I have for you, this meets all of these check boxes of needs that you gave me, you're going to make their entire year.
I know, and it's crazy because they say, like, moving is one of the most stressful things in your life, but moving and being in the military, it's almost like on another level because you have so many little things that you have to worry about. I
Absolutely.
I wanna dive into some of the misconceptions, in the future trends. So, what are some of those common misconceptions that you've seen when it comes to automating leasing for military families? And why do you think property managers may be hesitant, to embrace it?
With this piece, I don't know that it's necessarily unique to military housing. It's the same pushback that happens with pretty much any huge change. We get people that like the way that it is and they've been doing it for a very long time and they know what to do, and having to relearn a whole new process just feels too overwhelming, which is understandable. But in order to free up time to allow them to do their job more efficiently and more successfully, sometimes we have to do that. We just
Yeah,
have to take the leap and accept the new process. It takes investment from the company financially, and it takes in time, and it takes investment from the employees in their time and brain capacity. Because
yeah,
I mean, anyone who works on site knows you have limited capacity with the number of people that you talk to every single day and the number of tasks that you are just constantly juggling. I have so much respect for those that still work on site. After transitioning to corporate support, my goal is just to make sure that my on-site staff has everything that they could possibly need and more to do their jobs in a way that doesn't make them burnt out, because it's
yeah,
so easy to get burnt out on site.
it is. Totally. Kinda looking ahead, where do you see leasing automation, evolving for military communities? And is there anything that you think would really help ease that experience for on-site and, like you said, make it easy for them?
So I'm really excited about virtual assistants,
Yeah,
because if a military member is in a different time zone and they don't have time until after work to look into housing or whatever the situation may be, if there's a virtual assistant set up on your website, they can go in and ask, how much is a three-bedroom apartment? And it can
yeah,
tell them the different homes that are available. They can go in and ask, what are your hours? What's your phone number? A lot of them are even able to be configured so the future resident can ask questions about the local area. They can say, what is the nearest school or whatever they're particularly concerned about. What's the nearest coffee
Yeah.
place? That would be my question, of course.
Yeah. Priorities. Yeah.
Priorities, of course. Um, but with that, I know people get very concerned about whether that could replace leasing agents, or it could become a process where we don't we have fewer jobs, we have fewer
Yeah.
people on staff. And I feel that with using virtual assistants, that's never the goal. You can't replace a
Yeah.
person. That human connection that we give to our residents, that's irreplaceable. But we can free up our leasing agents' time so that they can have those deeper conversations that a virtual assistant can't have. If they're answering 100 phone calls, telling our hours and telling our address or telling what the nearest school is, they can't be on the phone having that in-depth conversation about what kind of home this other family needs. They have a family member who needs a single floor home, and so we have to try and figure out what area of the community works best for them, or whatever that situation may be that's more complex than what a virtual agent can do.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like that's such a constant theme that I'm always talking about with people is that the AI that is out there, it's not going to replace us, but it's going to, one, make things easier and maybe shift the way that we are doing things so that we can focus on those complex things. So I think that's right in line with what everybody's been saying and seeing. For sure. So I do have a bonus question that I ask everybody on my podcast. It doesn't have to be related to this topic, but is there a tech tool that you are loving right now in your everyday life and using?
Yeah, so I've been using Copilot from Microsoft. It's their virtual assistant, essentially.
Ah,
And so as I'm going through my different automation steps, if I run into something, I can just ask it, hey, what formula do I need to use here? And half the time, it's pretty correct. It at least
I
points
love
me in the
that.
right direction. If it doesn't know exactly the answer, it'll give me a handful of articles, and those articles always have something in them.
Oh, that's
So
amazing.
it's been really great. It's like ChatGTP, but specifically for Microsoft products like BI and Excel and all of that.
That's
So
really cool.
I've
I'll
been
have to
very
look into
excited
that.
about that one.
I love that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I feel like you've given such great information about this area. Where can people connect with you and where can they find you?
Sure. So they can find me on LinkedIn under my name, AJ Tibbitts. My LinkedIn address is actually linkedin.com/AJ Tibbitts. I was able to snag that username. So easy to find on there. They can also email me at my work email. That's my name, AJ Tibbitts at winco.com. Or they can even call or text me if they just have questions about automation. I'm passionate about this and I will talk to anybody about it, probably for hours. You'll get tired of hearing me talk about it.
I love it. No, it's really, really helpful. And I think it's going to help a lot of other people as well. So thank you so much for walking through this with me. And yeah, connect with AJ and see what she can tell you.